If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The Level Blue Futures Report 2024 sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledge increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business context that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today by visiting securityweekly.com/Level Blue. Cybersecurity simplified. Your customers' and employees' identities are your responsibility to keep safe. But who is helping you stay safe from identity-based threats? Identity is the key to getting security right. And with the right identity partner, so much more is possible for your business than you thought. From strengthening cybersecurity to increasing revenue to reducing inefficiencies and costs, Okta unlocks growth and new possibilities for its customers. Go to securityweekly.com/Okta to learn more about Okta and the company's commitment to leading the fight against identity attacks. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Ben Carr. All right, Ben, articles for the week. Some really interesting articles this week, and some of them I put in here only because when I read the title, I'm like, is that really what we want? Anyways, we'll get there. But I started with this first article, and there's a white paper attached to this. So I downloaded the white paper. It's called The CEO's Role in Setting Tone at the Top. And we've talked about this a ton, right? The CEO has to set the security tone at the top, because if he doesn't, guess what? Probably nothing's really going to get done. And so I wanted to pull down this white paper. So Tom Fox wrote this. He's with Corporate Compliance Insights. And it's interesting when I read it. Corporate Compliance Insights is the premier global news source for compliance, ethics, risk, and information security. But when you dig into this white paper, man, it's pretty heavy compliance driven.
Yeah, it really is.
and I would want it to be a little more maybe risk or InfoSec focused instead of just compliance focused.
Yeah, look, I think that's the problem again, we've talked about this a bunch of times. Like a lot of people outside of security view security as compliance, right? Still today, even though we've tried to break that mold and get away from it. And that's frustratingly, that again, you should get good compliance out of security with a little bit added on top that you might have to do. There are outliers, but generally you should get that. But I think the overall tone of the small article, but mainly the white paper here, is it's still value, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to lead by example. You have to clearly communicate. Like the guiding values must make sense, be clearly communicated by senior management in a variety of settings. Like this is one, like I don't know, like I first saw this out of some Deloitte work that with their methodology on it, and their number one thing is tone at the top. And when you really start to think about it, it's really the most important thing for any initiative, but certainly for security at the company. If you don't have support of the CEO, that trickles down to the rest of the C-staff. The rest of the C-staff, it trickles down to their employees. And by the time you're done, you've got no power, right? And I guess less about power, more about, authority and your ability to execute, right? Like that's what, when I say power, that's what I mean. It's not the, hey, I need the scepter to be able to bang it on people's head and tell them what to do. I need to make sure that I'm protecting the company. And like, there's a later article that talks about, CISOs scared about being replaced when the shit hits the fan proverbially. This is what happens if you don't have good tone at the top. Like, Yeah, I think the tips in here are really, really good. I would just replace the term compliance with security because 100%,
right? Lead by example, communicate clearly and consistently, embed security in business strategy, empower the CISO, right? Now, this is written very compliance oriented, but it can be applied the same way to security. And that's what I was hoping for. It would be a little more generic.
Literally take this article, do a cut and replace, right, for compliance with security, and then give that to your CEO and be like, yeah, this is a great article someone wrote.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah. Because all 10 of the tips that are in here are spot on if you just replace.
Look, I mean, if in the About the Author section, Thomas Fox, the compliance evangelist,
Right.
I mean, make it Bob Smith, the security evangelist, and you're
Yep.
you're you're off to the races.
Yes, absolutely. So there's two articles on this. They're from two different sources. I found out though. CISOs C-suite remain at odds over corporate cyber resilience. And then there's another article. I don't think I linked this one. That said basically board CISO mismatch on cyber responsibility NCS. So a couple of interesting articles around uh, cyber resilience and responsibilities for cyber, right? Which doesn't surprise me. I mean, we talk about this stuff every single week. I'm not surprised there's significant gaps because if we didn't have these gaps, we'd probably be in a slightly better situation.
Their state. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was a less than half of executives said their CISOs were heavily involved in strategic planning. Like, I'm guessing it's much less than half.
Yes.
Right? Like, I mean, how many CISOs do you know? And I know quite a few that would say they're involved in strategic planning of the company. I would say a lot of them feel like they're not even invited to the meeting, much less involved.
Right.
So that's a challenge. Like, you're not going to come out with a good outcome on that.
No, and we know that it's roughly 48% of the Fortune 500 have a CISO. So
Yep.
that means all of them are invited in the Fortune 500. My guess is they're not, because there's still those gaps, even in the Fortune 500. Now, this analyzed more than 4,000 businesses. So, I mean, this is a much bigger pool to look at, but still, yeah, you're probably right. It's probably much lower than that.
Yeah, I would guess.
Yeah. And then the other article talks about, new guidance encourages CISOs communication with board members. Yeah, I wish, can we please?
Yeah, I almost feel like the encourage needs to be changed to, complies, right? Or forces or mandates, right? Like you can encourage people to do a lot of things, but they just won't
Right.
ever do them.
They don't necessarily have to do them. All right. So this PortKNX survey. Now, normally I don't pull these kinds of surveys in. It's a vendor, but there's some really interesting data in here that I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This is interesting. So PortKNX survey reveals CISO's surprising views on job security, zero trust, multi-factor authentication, and more. And it ties in a little bit to some of the things we heard from Jeff Pollard on the last segment around divestiture, right? Where should you divest? And one of them is MFA, right? He said you need to move away from legacy MFA to phishing resistant MFA. This article is kind of re-emphasizing some of the issues around multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, and I think look, it talks about password fatigue, insider threats, phishing, right? So phishing goes back to what he was saying. I think when
Yep.
you think about password fatigue, like it's surprising to me that like the guidance came out about passwords and we should really get away from them. We shouldn't rotate them. And companies still don't follow that advice that comes out,
Mm-mm.
right? Like you see passwords being rotated every 30, every 60 days. And like, what do people do? They just add a number to the end of the password and rotate it, right? It's not helpful. So I think you need to think about the outcome you're trying to achieve versus what you're articulating as, the demands from security. It's not helping, right? I found the knack thing interesting on here. Knack
So did
investment
I.
is growing. Like
Yeah.
knack, like I haven't heard the term knack in a long, long
Knack
time.
is back? What?
I
Really?
guess
The
so.
last Knack
That's
vendor I knew was like Bradford Networks. I don't even know if they still exist. Like,
yeah.
that's how old Knack is, guys. Yes.
Zero trust skepticism. That was interesting to me,
Yeah,
right?
that was one of the ones I saw super interesting is that 100%, there were a couple hundred CISOs, all agreed that zero trust has not fully lived up to its promise because zero trust isn't easy, right? Like it's very difficult. And
Yeah.
I think that ties into the knack. Interesting part of this is
Yeah.
skepticism, but then we've resurfaced network access control as one of the control layers in zero trust. Anyways, but that one, yeah, that
I
was
think
really
people expect
surprising.
to buy buy
Zero trust.
zero trust, and
Yeah.
like you don't really buy zero trust, right? You buy a bunch of things together that knit together a strategy of zero trust, and so that knit together piece is still the hard thing to crack for a lot of people.
I agree. Um, what was it? There was a interesting. We did the segment with Sasha from when he was at Salesforce, right? zero trust is not a SKU. It's not even 5 SKUs, right?
Yeah.
Then to your point, you can't buy zero trust. It's a lot of work. The cyber insurance gap is an interesting one. 58% of CISOs unsure whether their cyber insurance policies adequately cover their critical threats. Not only that, less than, what was the number? Under 40% of claims are actually accepted. Like, it's a really, really low payout on top of that. So you combine those two numbers together, and there's definitely some concerns
But
with cyber
if you
insurance.
look at cyber insurance, right? So I think we've seen premiums continue to go up.
Yeah.
We've seen that they haven't really looked at, okay, what makes a good program. I was speaking at an insurance summit conference a couple weeks ago, and one of the questions I got after the thing is like, why is the insurance company still so bad at doing these assessments and understanding risk? And my comment was, well, look, it's the questions you ask. You ask, do you have MFA? That's a binary question. I can say yes, but I can still have 85% of my environment that's not covered by MFA, right? It's not the completeness of the question. And when you're asking somebody, and I'm getting, the insurance questionnaire, the third-party risk questionnaires, I'm taking the fastest way to exit, which is just, yes, if I can answer yes and check the box for anything, like, I will, as opposed to thinking about it in a more holistic fashion and addressing it appropriately. And then, like, my hope eventually would be, if you have the right program, if you have the right controls, there's some type of discount on the insurance, right? And it would help the insured out. In ransomware, stats that I've seen say that they paying out $1.06 for every dollar that somebody's spending on cyber insurance related to ransomware. So they're paying out more than they're taking in on a lot of these issues. So I think we're only going to keep seeing policies go up.
Yeah, and I know some of the brokers are trying to figure out how to gain access to the data and use real data to try to
Continuous
get a better
validation.
idea, right?
Yeah.
And offer discounts as part of giving them access to that data. And so the challenge is, how do you scale that out, right? We were talking about this with Jeff and security data lakes and stuff. Like, it's not that easy to give real-time access to some of this data either, Ben, especially if you're a smaller entity or even a large enterprise. Like, there's no like magic bullet here that just says, oh, here's access to all my control data. Like, nope, that still doesn't exist. But I am seeing trends that if you can get access to the data, you can get discounts as part of your premium for your policy.
Yeah, and we've seen that on the ransomware side. So, we work with some insurers that allow people to get discounts if you can say that you actually have, service deployed. So, yeah.
Yep. Next article, another one from Corporate Compliance Insights. So guess what I'm going to nitpick about? The CISO's journey from digital defender to compliance champion. I do not want to be a compliance champion personally. Like, when I read this, when I saw the article, the title, I'm like, we got to cover this because this is not what we want. There is some good information in here, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I think there is, but I'm not sure that that's the journey we want these CISOs to go on.
No, I've never been a fan of this. All right. I mean, if your goal is compliance, you will miss a bunch of stuff. Like, there'll be holes big enough to drive semi trucks through, and it doesn't work that way, right? Like, you need to flip this on its head and think about security first, and like, what do you need to add on to get compliance, if anything?
Right. And it does talk about the intersection of security and compliance in this article, right? And my philosophy has always been, if you have a really good, robust security program, compliance is just an outcome of that program. We're starting to see some traction there. But still, when you call your CISO the compliance champion, we're a little off in where the CISO should be focused.
Yeah, agreed.
It's the same. Warren Buffett. This is an interesting article. His secret to success: run it like a small business. I pulled this in. They interviewed one of his former, I think she's a CEO of one of the business that he invested in. And I just, when you think about Warren Buffett and you think about how he's been successful, a lot of people think he's, this just big, arrogant kind of leader. He's not at all. He's very humble. He's a huge reader. Like, he's like almost the opposite of what we see with very successful leaders these days. And to see an article written from one of his former colleagues, it's just really interesting to me to see how, his approach to how do you run the business, and you kind of run it like a little family business. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, the thing I took away was maybe like, look, you have to take your whatever piece you're running and take ownership of it and drive it forward and use what experience you have to
Right.
get the best outcome. But yeah, I guess based upon the title there, I was hoping for a little more insight
I
into it.
know.
But
I
yeah,
wanted a little more.
yeah,
She got some good things about him in here, but I'm like, no.
yeah,
Like, I want the little tips and tricks. Like,
yeah.
what do you have to do, right? Like, be a little more specific. Maybe she'll write a book that everybody will read on how to do it. But anyways, last article for today: 5 leadership hacks that will change your career. So a lot of leadership articles this week. Not much on the communication front. But this one was, these 5 leadership hacks can help you break through and achieve your goals. Again, we talk about a lot of these. I love the first one, embrace vulnerability.
So
Right?
you keep that at number one. I'm just embrace your inner Jason.
Yeah.
What's your
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably not number one, actually. Right?
yeah.
He always, kind of reorders everything. But I do like it in that none of us are perfect. We all have our weaknesses. And if you know them, then some of these other things that are in this article actually help you develop a way to address some of those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I like the vulnerability one. I also like the prioritize self-care, right?
Yeah.
I think both of those for a lot of leaders are hard because there's this perception that like I can't show any weakness, right? And I think both of those, the vulnerability side and the self-care, could be perceived as showing some type of weakness, right? Like you're not willing to put in 23 hours a day of work, right? Your vulnerability, hey, I don't know how to handle this. Can I get some assistance with it? But I think in the end result, if you do that the right way, I think it can actually be a part of strength, right? So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I did like the article.
And that's maybe why those first 2 are actually like 4 or 5 on Jason's list.
Yeah.
Because they're a little further down, because it talks about building authentic relationships. As a leader, you need strong relationships. They need to be authentic. They can't be fake relationships, right? And so it talks about building authentic relationships. Never stop learning ties into the vulnerability. If you know where your vulnerabilities are, now I can learn and address those vulnerabilities as part of that leadership journey to get there. And then developing emotional intelligence is, again, it has to come after. I don't think I know for me it wasn't, right? Under the development of emotional intelligence is something that takes longer to do, in my opinion, right? It's not something you just like walk in day one and you get it. It's something you develop over time. And so again, where it sits in this list around 3-4 is probably about right, Jason or Ben, because that's how Jason would stack.
I channeled Jason for you there.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that.
You absolutely did. Awesome. Yeah, I only grabbed a few this week, Ben, and Jason wasn't here. It's Columbus Day, so he's off. It's definitely a holiday in Rhode Island. I know that for a fact. It's not here in Texas. We're all still working today.
My kids are off actually from school. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, interesting.
They have morphed it to Indigenous Peoples Day. So
yeah, well, I knew that. Yeah, that they both show up on the calendar, but I know Rhode Island takes it off because we always took it off from a Security Weekly holiday perspective. But we still record under Cyber Risk Alliance. Ben, thank you for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Matt.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We will see you next week on Business Security Weekly.